so many things I loved about this book. Becoming one of my favourite authors. My first DNF of the year. Perfect time to start this series. I mean, if I can find those lecture notes. I had to go back and reread the page just to make sure I was understanding it right. It's time to chat through all the books that I read in March. I've got a new favourite, my first DNF of the year, and also my first classic book that I've ever read to chat about. So I've made myself a nice cup of tea and I thought I'd sit down and chat through my March reading wrap up. This month I've read 5 books, 2 of which were thrillers, which is a new genre that I'm absolutely loving. One being a romance, one of course being the DNF, which I'll chat a little bit more about later, and the other being the classic. So let's start with the first book I read, The Crash by Freida McFadden. This is actually the first Freida McFadden book I have ever read. I've heard so many people talking about her and talking about how much they love her writing, so I was really keen to pick up a book from her this month. I was actually heading into the bookshop looking for The Housemaid, which has been on my TBR for a good while, but I saw this one first and the plot and also the cover of this book just caught my eye and I felt like I wanted to pick it up and read this one first. The Crash follows Tegan, who is 8 months pregnant. There's a backstory to her pregnancy that's revealed in the early chapters of the book. It makes her question a big decision that she's about to make. To take a break from the difficulty of the situation she's experiencing, she decides to take a drive and go to stay at her brother's house. On her way and in the middle of a blizzard, the car loses control and she finds herself stuck in the snow and injured, and she is rescued by a couple. When she gets back to the couple's house, she realises things aren't quite as they seem. We essentially follow her over the next few days and her experience with the couple. I feel like this book started off really well. There were some quite big plot points revealed early on, like Tegan's pregnancy backstory. Because of the writing, I really got a sense of who Tegan was early on, which I think also helped with that fast pace at the beginning. And because it started off so quick, I felt like the rest of the book was going to continue at that pace throughout. I would say that it did slow down in the middle a little bit. There was a couple of chapters where I felt like I knew what was going to happen, and because it all took place in the same space, I felt like there was a little bit of repetition in those middle chapters, which I think is why the pace felt a little bit slower. Having said that though, the book definitely picked up towards the end. There were some pretty big twists and turns, some that I really didn't see coming. So overall the plot was good. I just wish that the twists and turns had been a little bit more evenly spaced throughout the book. Overall, I gave this book 3 stars. I found it a really interesting read, and it's definitely made me want to read more books by Freida McFadden because I really enjoy her writing. I think it might be the case that other books of hers will be ones that I prefer, but it was a really nice introduction to her style of writing. This month I also read my first book from the Rory Gilmore reading list. I'm a big fan of Gilmore Girls, so I've decided to make my way through all the books that Rory reads or references in the series. As I've said before, on my BookTok account it's a pretty long list, so it's going to take me a good while to get through. I think there's just less than 400 books on there. I thought it'd be a really fun thing to do. And this was the first book from that list, which also happens to be the first classic book I've ever read, which is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. As a big fan of the Greta Gerwig movie, I'm really surprised that I've never read this book before. And for those of you who haven't seen the movie or read the book, Little Women follows 4 sisters, Jo, Meg, Amy and Beth, through their teenage years and as they enter adulthood. It looks at their dreams and passions, the different decisions that the sisters are all making. It looks at their relationship to the world, their relationships with one another, and also their relationships with other people as well. And because I'm such a fan of the movie, this book really felt like a nostalgic read for me in a way. I think it was because it felt like I was revisiting characters and a story that I already know and love. I loved seeing how my favourite lines and moments from the movie were originally written in the book. I really enjoyed finding out which lines were pulled directly from the book, especially scenes like Laurie and Jo on the hill in the movie. Seeing how that was originally written and that a lot of the dialogue came directly from the book was really fun. I just really enjoyed that aspect of it. The way that Louisa May Alcott describes emotion in the book is so good, and I feel like because of that, and also because I just love the characters so much, I felt like I could connect to them and really understand them pretty quickly in the book. I also find it interesting, I think I googled that it was originally written in 1868 or around then, I think that's right, and it's really interesting to see that even though this book was written quite a long time ago now, I still felt like I could relate to so many of the emotions and the thoughts and feelings of the characters throughout the book, and I think that has a lot to do with how well it was written. Another thing I loved, there's so many things I loved loved about this book. Another thing I loved was the amount of time that it spanned in our characters' lives. I think it's around 7 years that we look at, and they're 7 years that in anybody's life can be filled with decisions or changes. It was really interesting to see those decisions being made and how each of the sisters' lives took a little bit of a different path. I also loved, and it's a reason why I love the movie so much and why it's such a comfort movie to me, I love how it reflects everyday moments, and those everyday moments are the special part of the book. It's the kind of book that I read and then it makes me appreciate those moments in my everyday that are nice as well. So I gave this book 4 stars. It's different to anything I've read before, and if you're looking to read your first classic book, I would really recommend this one. Now onto my first 5-star read of the year, The Couple at Number 9 by Claire Douglas. This book follows Saffron and Tom, who move into her grandma's old house, and when renovations get underway, the builders who are working on the house find 2 bodies buried in the garden. When the police come to figure out what is going on, eyes turn to Saffron's grandmother, who has just moved into a care home after having been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and the book flicks between perspectives of the characters. It kind of mainly focuses on Saffron and then flashes back to when her grandma lived in the house. This is the second book that I've read by Claire Douglas. I've also read The Woman Who Lied. She's very quickly becoming one of my favourite authors. I just did not see the twists in this book coming at all, and it was one of those books where it felt like in the majority of chapters they all ended with a new piece of information that moved the plot forward, and I think that really helped with making it a really fast-paced read. And right from the beginning, plot was happening. The bodies were found in the garden in chapter 1, so it felt like right from the off we were at a really good pace, and I felt like that pace kept up throughout the whole book. One thing I also really loved in this book was the addition of Saffron's mum as a character. She kind of vaguely remembers living in the town when she comes to stay with Saffron and Tom. I really enjoyed that we kind of followed her finding out information and gradually remembering things that are pretty central to the plot. It was a really interesting way to learn more about the story. And speaking of the characters, I felt like I really enjoyed how the character building happened alongside the plot. We were kind of learning about the backstory and key information about our characters as the events were unfolding. I think that that works really well in a thriller book. Something that I feel like I wouldn't necessarily usually love, but I actually really enjoyed in this book, was that not only were we flicking between perspectives from the different characters, we were also flicking between first person and third person. One of the characters' perspectives was actually the character talking to another character. I think that worked really well alongside the twists and the turns of the book and the kind of chopping and changing of the story. It kind of kept me on my toes, kept me guessing, and I really liked that in this book. So I gave this book 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. The point at which I knew I was going to give it 5 stars was when I read one of the twists and I had to go back and reread the page just to make sure I was understanding it right, because I couldn't believe what was going on. It was just such a good twist. Next comes my first DNF of the year, The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. The Bell Jar is a partly autobiographical book, and it follows Esther through her summer internship at a magazine, and it's set in New York in the 50s. I obviously didn't finish the book, but from having a little bit of a read online, I think it also goes on to explore themes like social expectations and also mental health. To be completely honest, I think one of the main reasons why I didn't finish this book was because I had just read The Couple at Number 9, which was so fast-paced and really gripping, and so when I started this book and it was a little bit slower paced at the beginning, and also it was a lot of character building, I think I just found it a little bit more difficult to get into and make that shift between those two different books. I do definitely think this is one that I will go back to. I don't think I put it down because it was terrible or anything like that. I actually think it's a really interesting book and I've heard so many great things about it. I actually studied sociology at uni, and in one of our lectures there was a quote from The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I'd be really interested, I mean if I can find those lecture notes, I'd be really interested to read this book and then see how it was discussed in that lecture. But yeah, definitely one that I will go back to. Next is a book that had been on my TBR for quite a while. It is Wild Love by Elsie Silver, and it's the first book in the Rose Hill series. The third book in this series has just been released and I keep seeing it all over my TikTok, so I felt like it was the perfect time to start this series. Wild Love is written from the perspective of our two main characters, Rosie and Ford. Ford. When the book opens, Ford is described as the world's hottest billionaire, and kind of in an effort to escape the spotlight, he moves back to his hometown of Rose Hill, where he's setting up a recording studio. In Rosie's timeline, Rosie is also moving back to Rose Hill. She has had a difficult experience at work and she's questioning her relationship, so decides to go back to her hometown. There's some quite big plot points that are spoken about early on in the book, but I obviously won't spoil that for you. But there's quite a lot of plot that happens early on in this book that then follows through the rest of the story. Rosie and Ford also have a shared history together. They reconnect when they're both back in their hometown. One way or another, Ford offers Rosie a job and she takes it, and we kind of follow their relationship from there. What I really liked about the book is that I felt like Ford and Rosie's relationship was perfectly paced. I didn't feel like it was rushed at all because they already knew each other, so it kind of felt like we were jumping back in to their dynamic and their relationship at the same time they were, and so I really liked that their dynamic was instantly funny and comfortable and kind of built from there. I also found Ford really funny. He had a really dry sense of humour, particularly in the earlier chapters, that was really making me laugh. There's one particular storyline that really brings that out of him, and it just kind of adds to him being a warm and likeable character. There are a few things that I tried with this book that I would really recommend. The first is immersive reading, which is something that I've really enjoyed recently. For those of you who might be new to it, which was me a few months ago, it's essentially where you read the physical copy of the book whilst listening to the audiobook. I really love immersive reading when a story is written from several different perspectives. The different perspectives are often read by different people. I just feel like it gives me a really deep sense of the characters when it's read that way, and I really enjoyed it with this book. I also tried book annotating. It was the first full book that I annotated. It was really nice when I finished the book to flick back through it, and now knowing the whole story, seeing which bits of the plot stood out to me. A side character in this book that I really liked was West, who's Rosie's brother and Ford's best friend. I partly wish we'd kind of heard a little bit more from him because he was pretty central to the dynamic between Rosie and Ford, and also to certain parts of the plot, so I just think I'd have enjoyed hearing a little bit more from him. But having said that, I believe the second book in this series centres around West, so I think I'd really enjoy the second book and learning more about him. I gave this book 4 stars. It was a really easy read, really enjoyable. I actually think it would make the perfect holiday read, and I can't wait to pick up the other 2 books in this series. I feel like it's been a really good month of books in March. I've found a new series that I love, read my first classic, and confirmed that Claire Douglas is definitely one of my favourite authors. And I'd love to know the books that you have been loving this month, and also what's on your April TBR. I always think it's really fun to know what everybody is reading, so do let me know. And thank you so much for watching. I haven't posted on this YouTube channel in such a long time. I used to post more lifestyle content on here, but now that I'm really enjoying books and posting on Book Talk, it feels really nice to kind of get back into filming through books. So I'm looking forward to posting more book related content. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll chat to you again soon.